We are continuing our study in the book of Acts. We're now in chapter 25. Chapter 25, Paul is being held as prisoner in the city of Caesarea Maritima. This is the capital of Jerusalem. Felix, the governor, put him in prison, but it wasn't a very harsh sentence. It wasn't really doing hard time. Paul was in a beautiful palace, had a large swimming pool there. It was a beautiful spot on the ocean. Paul's friends were allowed to come visit him and help him and support him. Felix, the governor, very corrupt governor, was hoping that Paul would come and bring him money and bribe him to get out of prison, but Felix did not do that. Paul did not do that, did not give Felix any money. He stayed in prison. And during this time, during this 2-year time, it's speculated that Luke was with Paul. It doesn't say that explicitly, but scholars expect that Luke was with Paul, and that this would have been a good time for Luke to gather material, talk to Paul, start preparing and thinking about the book of Acts, which you're taking in today, where they would have been in close fellowship. Luke would have been close to Jerusalem, being able to get firsthand accounts from eyewitnesses in Jerusalem and gather material to prepare the book of Acts. So that 2 years wasn't a wasted time. It was a very turbulent time in the history of Jerusalem, of the land of Israel. And now we come here to chapter 25, verse 1, Acts 25, verse 1. We read, "Now when Festus was come into the province, after 3 days he ascended from Caesarea to Jerusalem." So the previous governor, Governor Felix, was recalled to Rome. Governor Felix was not a good governor. His tenure was marked by political corruption, graft, scandals. There were turbulent times in the countryside. There were many bandits going about the countryside. These robbers would accost people on the road. There was trouble with these Sicarii. These are people who murdered. They were assassins, this cult of assassins that was going through the countryside, killing officials, either Jewish officials or Roman officials. They didn't discriminate, but they would murder these officials, sowing discord and discontent among the population. And Felix was unable to get a handle on this. Felix himself was a cruel and brutal man. He was the governor there of Judea. And so he was called back to Rome for mismanagement, for malfeasance and mismanagement. And Felix was banished because of his mismanagement. The only reason they didn't execute him was because of his brother, Paulus, who was a high official at court. But he was banished, and the story goes that Felix left after his banishment and committed suicide. So Felix is now out of the picture, and into the picture comes this man who we're introduced here in verse 1, chapter 25, verse 1, this Festus. Now, by all accounts, Festus was a good governor. His term was from 58 to 62. So he ruled there some years. And he was an equitable man. He was a good choice to be governor. People liked Festus. And we can see that as he came into the province, Festus, when he came into the province, you can see his attention and his interest in the Jews, because after only 3 days, he went from Caesarea, this beautiful, rich, well-appointed Roman city. After only 3 days, he hustles right down to Jerusalem. He didn't fool around. He was very eager to make acquaintance with the Jewish high council, to introduce himself, to know what was going on, to kind of get the lay of the land. And so you can see he didn't even have his luggage unpacked yet. And here he is hustling down to Jerusalem to make the acquaintance of the Jewish council. We come to verse 2. The high priest and the chief Jews informed him against Paul and besought him and desired favor against him that he would send for him to Jerusalem, lying in wait to kill him. So here we have in verse 2, the Jewish high priests, they are trying to poison the new governor's mind against Paul. Right away, they set off when they met the new governor. The first thing they did is they brought up this issue of Paul. They called this troublemaker, and they besought him. They started pestering the new governor right away to do something with Paul. Now, at this time, remember, Paul had been in prison for 2 years, and so the old high priest, Ananias, is no longer in the scene. And at this time, they have a new high priest in the picture whose name was Ishmael, the son of Fabii. And Ishmael, according to the commentaries, was a corrupt high priest. He was no better than Ananias, who we saw before. And you can see that right here in verse 2. Because already, this brand new high priest, they were trying to turn Felix's mind. So this was a time of great turmoil in Jerusalem. Fabius, the high priest, got into an argument with the King Agrippa II. And this argument revolved around a new palace that King Agrippa built. Built this palace, built a beautiful courtyard that overlooked the temple. And the priests did not like this new palace that overlooked their courtyard. And so they built a wall to cut off the view from the new palace. A great way to win favor with the king. And so this thing turned into a political situation. And the governor was involved, Felix was involved, the King Agrippa was involved, who we're going to meet next week, in trying to force the Jewish High Council to tear down this wall. They wouldn't tear down the wall. The Jewish High Council sent a delegation to Rome to appeal to Nero, the emperor, to let them keep the wall. So the emperor's wife got involved in this, and the upshot of the thing was that they kept the wall, but Ishmael, the high priest, was then taken prisoner. He was held in Rome. They wouldn't let him return to Jerusalem. He was a political prisoner to ensure that the Jews would do what they were supposed to do and keep them all calm. So the whole thing is a very, very mixed up affair here. Anyway, so this is the high priest. They were informing, they were speaking against Paul. That's the important point. Moving on to verse 3. And they desired favor. They wanted to have favor against Paul. And what they wanted Festus to do, that he would send for him to Jerusalem. And these assassins were laying in wait to murder Paul. All these assassins that were roaming the countryside were hand in glove with the Jewish authorities. Yeah, they were going to ask Felix to bring Paul to Jerusalem, and then they were going to assassinate him on the road. But Festus, even though he was new in the territory, apparently he was not a green politician, he recognized that this wasn't the right course of action. So Festus answers, verse 4, answered that Paul should be kept at Caesarea. Festus goes on to say that he himself would depart shortly to Caesarea Maritima. And he asked them in verse 5, let them therefore, he said, which are among you, which are able to go down with me and accuse this man if there be any wickedness in him. So Festus wisely didn't give in to these requests, these spurious requests to have Paul brought to Jerusalem. Instead, Festus says that we're going to all go back to Caesarea, and there we're going to get to the bottom of this matter. So they're going to appear before Festus in Caesarea Maritima. Verse 6. And when he had tarried among them more than 10 days, so Festus is there, taking in the sights of Jerusalem, getting to know the town fathers. He met with the council. So he spends a few more days, a week or so, in Jerusalem, and then he went down to Caesarea. And as soon as he got back to Caesarea, the next day, what happened? The next day, sitting on the judgment seat, he commanded Paul to be brought. So Festus is not fooling around here. He gets right down to business. Apparently, the Jews had come with him. Verse 7, and when he was come, the Jews which came down from Jerusalem stood around, and look, and laid many grievous complaints against Paul, importantly, which they could not prove. So they were there making all these accusations against Paul, and we've seen these accusations before. They accused Paul of defiling the temple. They accused Paul of being of a sect of the Nazarenes, which was a crime, actually, to be a part of an unauthorized sect. They accused Paul of sowing sedition and rebellion among the populace. And so all these very serious charges, all these charges that could be all bring the death penalty, they're bringing these charges against Paul, and they couldn't prove a thing. They didn't have any witnesses. They didn't have any evidence. There was just words. Just words that they were bringing against Paul, making all these charges. And Paul, verse 8, while he answered for himself, and this is what Paul said, neither against the law of the Jews, neither against the temple, nor yet against Caesar have I offended anything at all. So flat out, Paul says, I haven't done any of the things that they're accusing me of. He says, I haven't done anything against the law of the Jews. Paul says, I have not profaned the temple. He has not been inciting sedition and rebellion. In fact, he hasn't done anything wrong at all. And this is a fact of the matter. And one thing, it's very difficult to face charges, especially when you're innocent. An innocent man facing charges is very, very difficult. Verse 9, but Festus, willing to do the Jews a pleasure, that's a very important phrase, willing to do the Jews a pleasure, answered Paul and said, wilt thou go up to Jerusalem and there be judged of these things before me? You see, Festus could not transfer court to Jerusalem without Paul's permission. It was against the law for Festus to change the venue without permission of the accused. So if Festus wanted to change the venue, Paul had to agree to it. So this is what Festus is trying to do. He's willing to do the Jews a favor. That's what this means. Willing to do the Jews a favor to move the trial to Jerusalem. And this is what the Jews wanted, of course, because they wanted to assassinate Paul. And this is, and we know that Paul was innocent because later on, Agrippa is going to say this in Acts 26. Agrippa said unto Festus, this man might have been set at liberty if he had not appealed to Caesar. So you know that Agrippa knows Paul is innocent, or the Festus knows Paul is innocent. So here he is. Paul is standing in court. Festus is asking him if he wants to go to Jerusalem. And this is what Paul says. Then said Paul, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat where I ought to be judged. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as thou very well knowest. Festus knew this. Even though he was a good governor, you could still see there was the hint of corruption around him. That he was playing politics with Paul's life. He wasn't really being honest with Paul and with the situation here. He was still favoring these Jews, favoring the high council. So Paul was unjustly accused. I remember when I was a boy, I I made some bad decisions as a child. I admit it. I did some bad things. But there was one time in particular that I remember, something that stands out to me. And this was we were visiting some friends, and the friends brought out some cookies, and there was 3 cookies, and there was 3 of us. And so they gave me the first choice of cookies. Now there was 1 chocolate chip cookies and 2 raisin oatmeal cookies. And I had the first choice. And I looked at those cookies and I said, I'm going to take the chocolate chip cookie. And I'm going to leave these other 2 cookies for my brother. So I took the chocolate chip cookie, and boy, I enjoyed that. And my brother, he comes to pick, and he says, no, he says, I don't want a cookie. And I didn't think anything of it. My little brother, of course, he grabbed a cookie. He liked that cookie. And my mom comes in the room, and she says, what did you do, Robbie? Did you eat the chocolate chip cookie? You should have left that for your brother. You know your brother doesn't like raisins. And so she threw this on me. I said, what, Mom? I didn't know that he didn't like raisins. I just wanted that chocolate chip cookie. But she was sure that I had done this out of spite. She was sure that I had picked this cookie out of spite. And I remembered that. I remembered that, being unjustly accused of something. That really strikes a deep chord when that happens to somebody. Imagine what's going through Paul's mind now. To be unjustly accused. To be unjustly accused of this thing. Very, very troublesome situation. There is a story of a man named Darrell Burton who was wrongly convicted in 1985 of capital murder. He's convicted. He was charged and convicted of murdering Don Ball, a known drug kingpin at a gas station. And this man was sentenced to life in prison without parole, and he ultimately served 24 years in prison. And what happened was there was a man who was brought up on other charges who gave false testimony about Darrell. And because of this false testimony, Darrell was convicted to life sentence in prison. No parole, life sentence for this supposed cold-blooded murder that he was supposed to commit. Someone eventually heard his story. It came out that the witness later recanted his testimony, and some good Samaritans picked up Darrell's case, presented the evidence, and it all came out that the whole conviction was a scam. It was a whole fraud. And Darrell was set free. But he said when he got to prison, he was bitter. He was very bitter about the situation. And when he walked into that prison, there was a sign on the wall that said, "Welcome to Missouri State Prison. Leave your hopes, your family, your dreams behind." This is what Darrell read as he walked into this prison, wrongly convicted, life sentence, in there for 24 years. He said as he was in prison, he cried out to the Lord Jesus Christ, "Jesus, if you are real, help me get out of this place. Not only will I serve you, but I will tell the world about you." 24 years later, someone stepped up. The case was reopened, and Darrell walked out a free man. Darrell is a pastor at Resurrection Church. He has written a memoir, Innocence, A Second Look, Tragic Wrongful Conviction, Triumph, and Redemption. His life was changed. He became a minister of the gospel, and now he has started a ministry to help people who were wrongly convicted. That came out of this wrong conviction. God was able to take this situation, to take this wrong conviction, this very great evil, and turn it into something positive. God was able to use that. And here we see Paul in a very similar situation, the Apostle Paul. He's appealing to Nero. The year would be around the year 60. Nero had just had his mother killed. His mother, Nero's mother, was an influence in his life. Nero's mother put a damper on Nero's bad behavior, and he didn't like that, and so he had his own mother, assassinated. And this was when Nero started taking a dark turn. And here we have Paul appealing to Nero. And from the outside looks like a terrible situation. But God is in the middle of this situation working. God has this figured out. God has a plan. God is in control. And God is going to use this situation for His glory. We can't look at it from our perspective and think we're reaching the depths of the truth. We have to consider God has a plan. We have to walk in that plan. Sometimes it walks through some dark places, as it was done for the Apostle Paul here, as it did for Darrell Burton. So Paul, wrongly accused, and this is what Paul says, verse 11. For if I be an offender or have committed anything worthy of death, I refuse not to die. But if there be none of these things whereof these accuse me, may no man deliver me unto them. I appeal to Caesar. So you can see here that Paul lived his life. He ordered his life by a system of meritocracy. He ordered his life by empirical truth, as opposed to superstitions and oppression and entitlements. No, Paul didn't go there. Paul was willing to face the consequences of his actions. He was willing to live what he talked. But he said there's no basis for these charges, and he appealed to Caesar. Then Festus, when he had conferred with the council, answered, Thou hast appealed unto Caesar thou shalt go. And so Paul was ultimately put on a ship, ultimately sent to Nero's court, and ultimately ended up in prison for a time in Rome. But God is in control. These things were all according to God's plan. God loved Paul and watched out for him. God loves you and me, and God watches out for us. May God be praised.